Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here for our conversation about when history gets heated. We're delighted to have Kyle Pittman here to just kind of share with us a little bit about his experience. Kyle is a Nez Perce and Yakima descendant, and he teaches in the Native Pathways program at the Evergreen State College. He holds degrees in Native American and Indigenous Studies and Tribal Governance. And for our purposes, the exciting piece of his resume is that he is a moderator on the largest online public history forum, Ask Historians, on Reddit. Raise your hand, digital or physical, if you have ever been to the Ask Historians Reddit page. Cool. Okay. Well, maybe Kyle can share. I have, but I don't spend a lot of time on Reddit. So maybe Kyle will share a little bit about what this is, and then he's going to sort of course, share some things about his experience moderating this massive digital public forum. With that, take it away, Kyle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you to everybody who's here. I really appreciate you taking the time to come to this so we can have some time to chat and for being invited here to share my experiences. I will go ahead and share my screen here. And I do, through this PowerPoint that I'm using, I will introduce y'all to Reddit, talk about that, a little bit about that in case you haven't used it before, don't have a lot of familiarity with it, and then use that as kind of a point to just extrapolate some things that we'll talk about. So let's see here. All right, can y'all see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so yeah, when history gets heated, the goal here for this opportunity is to provide some tips and some guidance on what it's like to moderate history forms, but not just history forms in general, right? Of course, our organizations are responsible for providing education to the public and for engaging in this discourse on a myriad of topics, right? Often centered around history, but that also quickly bleed into other facets of life too, depending on where the comments go. And so hopefully we can come together, have this conversation, and like I said, extrapolate some points from some of my experience that I want to share with y'all, and we can have some guidance, right, about what might be useful for y'all as you start navigating or are navigating these kinds of discourse and conversations happening on your own social media platforms. So a little bit about me, as Allison had already mentioned in the introduction, my name's Kyle Pittman. I'm a Nez Perce and Yakima descendant. I am a faculty member at the Evergreen State College where I teach specifically with our Native Pathways program. And my areas or fields of study that I focus on are federal Indian law and policy, American Indian histories, digital public humanities, and public administration. And I've been a moderator on Reddit, which is a rather large social media platform up there with the likes of Facebook, of Twitter, of Instagram, that really focuses on user-driven content and engagement and discourse through the submission of posts and people commenting on those posts. Reddit's been around for a long time, and I have, for better or for worse, have been on Reddit for a long time. I've been a moderator of the largest Native American subforum, or we call them subreddits, called Indian Country for 10 years. And I've been a moderator of Ask Historians for 8 years, 9 years coming up here. And I've been a contributor to Ask Historians for even longer than that, though, and I'll explain what that means a little bit too. And just to give you a little bit more reassurance, about what I'm talking about here as well, I have a recently published work that I contributed to with some other scholars doing some work in this area, specifically talking about epistemic injustice in online communities and specifically how that is intersected with moderation policies. So how do online communities actually enact principles that are based around their ideas of justice and around knowledge, and how are those hindered by these online spaces and conflicts of values, which is found here. And if anybody would like copies of these slides, certainly may have it. Okay, so Ask Historians, moderating Ask Historians. Like I said, I'm kind of going to try to go through this point quickly, mostly because I think we need to have time to get into talking about the tips because not every heritage organization, is probably operating their own subreddit. So I definitely want to acknowledge that the examples I'm providing here are at least initially a little niche to the platform of Reddit, but the idea is for looking for principles and overall frameworks and strategies that can be employed across social media platforms. But to give you an idea where they're coming from, right? Ask Historians, usually abbreviated AH, is the largest online public history forum on the internet. It has, as of probably about 1 a.m. this morning, when I was putting the finishing touches on these slides, had over 2 million subscribers, 2,459,071 subscribers. We have 33.5 million views and 3.4 million unique visitors over the past 30 days. And the history form, the organization, more or less, the project that we call Ask Historians, doesn't just exist on the sub form or the subreddit hosted on Reddit, but we also have a presence with a podcast, with a digital conference that we held for a couple years. We also have a presence on Twitter, Facebook, and academic conferences as well, where members of our moderation team have gone to present on various things that pertain to our sub. It was founded in 2011 as a digital humanities project with the goal of providing tightly regulated, bigotry free spaces where the public can actually engage with historical professionals and grassroots historians. It's very much an intentional space that cultivates dialogue with the public, between members of the public, those who have questions about history, and those who we consider to be experts, but not necessarily experts, right, in this kind of conventional sense where we want them to be credentialed, we want them to have a title, right? But people who have demonstrated through continuous submission and essentially community peer review of their submissions that they have the expertise, the knowledge, the research ability to provide high quality answers to those questions. The forum itself is a Q&A style where members of the public, like I said, pose these questions and they receive answers that are written by other users that are in accordance with our standards. And we have kind of a category of recognized experts that we call flares. Understanding that the flare is spelled there not the same as like a road flare. It's just how it's developed. We call them flares, and they form like a panel of experts. So that's how we refer to them. We have about 300 of them that we work with, counting moderators as well, that are recognized with a label next to their username that specifies what area of history or an adjacent field of study that they specialize in that they provide answers around. But anybody of the public can go ahead and drop an answer so long as it conforms to our rules. And so Ask Historians is very much treated by the moderation team as an outgrowth project from Reddit, and in many respects, it acts as its own operation. We have like I said, we have our own website. We've organized our own conferences. We've sent people to conferences. Per Reddit's terms of policies, we are not allowed to be paid for being moderators. So we do not make profit at all. This is all completely volunteer work. However, we do have the ability to generate revenue that then helps meet some of our needs, whether it's with going to conferences, whether it was through sponsorships, like we were officially sponsored by Reddit for our 2021 digital conference, or also for producing swag because we like to build the community. So plenty of opportunities like that. And like I said, very much an outgrowth beyond just Reddit, the social media platform. Moderating Ask Historians is a pretty big task. We have a team of 60 accounts that are on the moderation list. And I say that because 44 of them are human, 6 of them are bots. And we very much love our auto moderators that do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So both human labor and automation are employed to carry out our daily and systemic tasks. Questions and answers are reviewed by the moderators to ensure adherence to our rules and standards. And we use various kinds of both native and third-party platform tools. So things that are provided by Reddit itself built into the website. and then things that users have created outside of Reddit that can then be added to modify your social media experience. We use these things in combination to expedite reviews of questions and answers, to streamline our actions when dealing with like a bulk of comments, or just to otherwise increase our productivity as moderators. And the mod team conducts its mission and operations through various channels as well. We have our own separate subreddit that's just for handling moderation business. We actually have a separate subreddit as well that's for panelists, our flares. We have our own Slack space that we use to communicate directly with each other over various matters. And then, as mentioned, we have our own website and our own email account to handle official business that the subreddit does.
Kyle, really quick, this is all volunteers. There's no paid staff involved in
Correct.
any of this? Yeah.
Yep, correct. All volunteer, and it's for some it's a sticking point where they do really enjoy. This is what they do for their hobby, and others as they're building their career, maybe they're going through their undergrad or graduate studies, and this is something where they can kind of start to dip their toes into what a space like this is like, where it's framed by standards or expectations that we might see in academia, in a higher education setting. That part's a little tricky to navigate, right? Because we're talking about a very large online social media platform where, in our day and age, people are very accustomed to expediency, to instant gratification, to not having to read a whole lot. We very much cut against the grain on Reddit and the how the internet culture in general in this way, in that we don't have a focus on brevity. And in fact, usually a short canned response will probably get your response canned if you're trying to answer a question that doesn't meet our standards. And this has been very much a source of contention with many users who are not familiar with our subreddit, but it's because we are very much intentionally trying to provide a curated space that meets a specific goal of encouraging this public discourse where you don't have to write the length of an essay to answer a history question. Very true, but you also should be able to verify what it is that you're saying. We'll talk about that a little bit more too as that gets to, well, here the rules. Ask Historians has very detailed rules for asking questions, for providing answers, and for general user conduct on the subreddit. These rules provide not only the text of the actual rules, what you can and can't do, but also a copious amount of additional resources. We have guides, rules roundtables where we explain each of our rules in depth. We have meta threads, which is where people ask questions about the moderation style or the rules on the subreddit itself. We have explanation of sources, as in, what's a primary, secondary, tertiary source? How do you know, or what are good sources? How do you write good questions? I mean, we're talking just an insane amount of work that has been created over the years to try to achieve this mission, where you can get the public, you can get, who in academia we might consider lay people, right, to engage with historical discourse in ways that are, of course, appropriate, that are not tempered by misinformation or disinformation, but that doesn't have the high barrier that academic discourse does for the general public. So this is very much a way to encourage people, and this is why social media is very powerful, is it has this democratizing effect for the work that we do. And especially when we're talking about local, regional, state historical societies, museums, public heritage organizations, right? That kind of public engagement is critical. It's crucial for our ability to communicate with the public, to be engaged with them, to be seen as valued by the public. And so that, really Ask Historians is meant to try to help achieve that goal as well. And what again, hopefully what we can pull from here are how we can better facilitate that within your own organizations as well. So, with this, we have examples of good and, I'm sorry if you can hear that beeping real quick. There's some work being done in my home. um, we have some within these rules also examples of good and not so good manners of posting. So throughout there, I got these kind of screenshots here that you can see what show our rules in brief on the left side here, which people can have as quick reference. But if you look over here, this is actually what the rules look like, which is very lengthy, that we cover a wide breadth of things under these rules. And sometimes it is arduous to work with the public with the expectation that they read and understand these rules. But we'll talk about that a little bit more as well when we get to tips and tricks about these things, because having a robust set of rules is pretty much the building block to how you can effectively moderate your own spaces on your own social media platforms or accounts, and how you can justify the actions that you take. So the rules are cited frequently throughout our community and the things that we do, whether that's when we remove posts or we ban users, or we restrict their ability to engage somehow. It's always rooted in this is the rule that was violated. Here's how it was violated. Whether we're dealing with frequently asked questions, depending on how frequently asked it is, we might just point them to our FAQ, which is, about 3 times, 4 times the size of our rules. Or if we remains up, we have very dedicated users who link to the FAQ as well, and also the rules, depending on what kind of question it is. And then also even approved threads, approved posts or questions that are poorly framed. We have ways of working with those kinds of questions as well, because sometimes they don't violate the rules. Sometimes it's an important question, but the user, the member of the public, doesn't know how to really articulate the question that they're asking, or again, not an explicit violation of our rules. And we want to provide coaching in this kind of public format, right, for the educational purpose. So these are all things, right, when you're trying to envision how do you set rules or guidelines or conduct for the spaces that you're engaging with publicly and on your social media platforms. These are all kinds of considerations that should be brought in when talking about your rules or crafting your rules. They are going to be the bedrock essentially to how you are able to manage the discourse that unfolds in online spaces.
Kyle, can I pop in with another question from the group?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, who moderates the moderators?
So that is a good question. Back in the glory days of Reddit, it was very much the moderators were not really moderated. You kind of have to know a little bit of the history of Reddit to effectively answer that question, in that the platform very much was started by kind of the I've heard a faculty member, a colleague of mine, describe it as the techno broligarchy. Kind of those individuals who very much the libertarian esque individuals who prioritized free speech, especially when it came to large platforms that provided public voice. And so for a long time, there wasn't necessarily a way to moderate the moderators. But over the last 5 years, especially since Reddit has gone to being a public company, they have instituted ways to have oversight over moderators. Moderators have their own code of conduct that they can establish for themselves, but now the admins, the administrators of Reddit, have implemented a general code of conduct for moderators that can be used as a way to ensure that moderators are acting in impartial and fair manners, that they're handling disputes, and that they are essentially performing the responsibilities of a moderator. Because even though all moderators across the entirety of the subreddits, there's over 100,000 subreddits. I mean, it's probably over 250,000 really. But each one of them being their own person, their own volunteer on this, Reddit runs on moderator labor. That's a whole other ethics article that I would like to write one day. But because that's the case, right, Reddit, the company, has seen that there is a need to ensure that moderators are performing the tasks that essentially keep the subreddit running. Now, within Ask Historians, we very much have a reputation on the platform of being one of the, if not the most high quality subreddit in terms of the what the standards we have for what we expect for contributions, the enforcement of the rules that we have. I mean, to the point where kind of some stereotypes have developed about how we enforce rules that aren't even true. Like, we don't require you to post source citations in your initial answer. We do require you to provide sources upon request, however, and your answer can be removed if you do not do so within a 12-hour period. But uh, people say, "Oh, if you don't post sources with your initial comment, it just gets removed. They don't even care. They'll take it out immediately." So there's a kind of some stigmas that have developed now, which is usually works in our favor. Sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, this is my long-winded answer to say that there is now some internal structure, oversight structure built into how subreddits are managed and overseen by the admins, where users can report moderator conduct. But for a long time, and this has been the case with Ask Historians, we create our own accountability measures that we would hope that the community holds us to and that we hold ourselves to as well. Knowing that we are dealing with revenue, for example, holds us accountable to the terms of service that Reddit implements around fiscal responsibility, allowing meta threads where people can post directly to our subreddit questioning the application of rules is another way for people to publicly see our rationale for things. And of course, the threat is that if we ever incur the ire of our community, that very many of them will certainly not come to our forum, though they will walk away from it, which then leads to a dead form. It's especially very critical when it comes to our Flare users, our panel of experts who we rely on to provide these high quality answers. Um, so this kind of get into right some of the other things around like training around this to moderate such a large community effectively and according to the higher standards that we have for user generated content. Mods are provided onboarding from our team of existing moderators. We have a PowerPoint Google Deck presentation as a quick start guide to give them a crash course about what it's like to mod in general. We have a handbook that we have created that covers the very basics of moderating on Reddit. That also contains specific guidelines for ourselves about how do we interact. So this internal document is very much a supplement to the rules. We provide an introduction to mod tools, automation, third party apps, and we provide descriptions of the Ask Historians structure. But probably the most critical thing, and I'll talk about this in the takeaways that I think might work for other organizations, is that we have this aforementioned code of conduct, rules that we have for ourselves as moderators, and how we should apply the rules of the subreddit. And this is very critical when it comes to understanding when we have a situation with problematic material, with a cantankerous user, or misinformation or disinformation. How do we handle that? This code of conduct tells us about our internal actions. Ideally, our rules will have a public facing version of this as well. That way users will know, and we always have a public justification for what we do. And at the same time, we can handle things with our discretion to ensure that everything remains appropriate and civil within our social media platforms. And just to give you an example here, this is a screenshot as well. These are the code of conduct areas, which are almost as long as our rules. So it's not an easy task actually to become an Ask Historians moderator. We carefully vet our contributors who do they're from our Flare ranks, but very carefully vet them and go through a voting process, and it's arduous. Okay, so that's just the basics, like I said, of how Reddit operates. But some takeaways. Let's extrapolate from that. Like, what can we learn from some of these things that I've shared? Some additional examples as well. Takeaway number one is dealing with the public is hard, and I should have put a content warning in here. This one here on the right is particularly terrible. What was said. I'll talk about it in a second. Online content moderation has become increasingly difficult in an age where mis and disinformation is very prevalent and pervasive. Users of public platforms, as one might be surprised to hear, don't like censorship, and they don't like the appearance of censorship. And of course, that our topic for today kind of inherently deals with this topic of censorship, and that makes dealing with the public very hard because they don't like it. Right? They even I will say this, and this is a difference between my experience and probably many of y'all's experience, right? Is that Reddit being a privately owned corporation means that, of course, the ideas of the First Amendment and free speech, public record, all of those things that we have to worry about as public officials, they don't apply to Reddit. However, the public, the people who use it, still very much like to think that they do. So they have to be reminded that Reddit is not a public sidewalk; it is a subreddit, and the moderators, for the most part, are free to enforce the rules, as they see fit. That, of course, is different than our situations as public officials, oftentimes where we have to preserve comments that are submitted on our public outlets, on our social media platforms, because of public records, or we cannot just outright ban or block users because of First Amendment protected speech. So those things are definitely considerations that have to be made, and some of the takeaways and the tips that I'll provide here will help approach this topic with those considerations in mind. But I also just want to put out there, right, that this is a fundamental difference, that a lot of my experience is that I have the freedom to just be able to block someone who's being racist. And that's not always the case otherwise. The effectiveness of our online educational content is also another really important factor as to why dealing with the public is hard. Is that, whatever it is that your organization is trying to educate the public on, right? Whether you've made a social media post advertising a new collection, whether you are pulling something from your archives or collections and you're wanting to highlight a very specific contribution from, a historical person or an event that happened in the past, right? That's relevant to your local community, whatever it might be. The effectiveness of how you will use that to educate the public is tempered, is complicated by several factors. Some of these are the current political conditions that might affect how people view certain contributions or submissions or things that you're trying to highlight. The educational background of your audience is also another key factor. It's an unfortunate thing that maybe some of us are familiar with, right? But belief in the Holocaust is something that is actually on a downward trend, unfortunately, according to some recent studies. And so, taking into consideration, if you're trying to address very impactful moments of history, when we're talking about like maybe colonization or genocide, women's suffrage, whatever it might be, that the background information or knowledge of your audience plays a very vital role into how they will respond to that kind of content being brought forth. The type of platform you're using. Moderating on Reddit is very different than moderating on Facebook, and it's very different than moderating on TikTok or Instagram. So that's something to really keep in mind too, that this changes how the public interacts. On a place like Reddit, where the content is user generated and is contingent really upon engagement through discourse in this commenting on threads style. That's very different than what you have on TikTok or Instagram, right? Where people are able to just scroll through content, or Twitter or X. I refuse to call it X, really. Twitter. People might make a comment in very, very brief because they're restricted by the character limit. They don't really have the ability to engage in in-depth discourse. On Reddit, you have a 10,000 character limit for your initial comment, and you have the ability to make follow-up comments. So, it's the platform style or type or nature is also very critical in this discussion too. And then also societal and cultural trends of communication. As I mentioned before, in our day and age, there's a huge desire to focus on expediency, instant gratification, brevity. That you have a high turnover, right, of consumable content, and on a place like Ask Historians, we don't cater to that. We get a lot of questions, a ton of questions, really. Like We can get, probably 200 questions in a day. But I'll get, like, as a stat, from May of this year, our answer rate was about 34%, 33, 34%. So the majority of them don't get answered, which is okay. It works into the larger purpose of what we do on Ask Historians. But that means that those answers that are being provided, we're talking essay length responses to people's questions about, like, um, why was painting pictures of snails jousting prevalent in medieval times? Yeah, like that's a real question, and it's true. It's kind of memeified, actually. The medieval Europeans drew these pictures of jousting snails, or something about, like, why were animals being put on trial, for religious crimes, or why? Oh, so many people ask about Hitler. It's crazy, like seriously, questions about, like, what did Hitler think about this, just about a random thing, about Da Vinci, it's like, anyways, so we cater to those and we provide long form answers to that, but that's not always copacetic with the styles that are preferred in online engagement nowadays. And that's something to account for as well, as to how effective your education content will be. Really, what is the bandwidth of your audience and the bandwidth of the platform to provide explanations to your audience? So, some tips to for number one, right, is having commitment to your mission and serving the public interest. I think that's definitely number one for those of us who are in this room here. We need to have thick skin when we're dealing with the public, but especially when they're empowered by anonymity in the digital realm. This one I gave here gives you some examples of some of the messages we received. These are just within from the last week. Just three messages we received from users that we have either banned or who just don't like us, and sometimes it's as simple as just saying that, we're lonely. Sometimes it's anti-Semitic bigotry that they send to us, and it's a situation, right? That you kind of got to be prepared to deal with that. And you kind of get that. You get not as many compliments, but the compliments you do get are really nice. Um, so anonymity is a very powerful thing, right? That empowers people to act maybe differently than that how they would, of course, if they had their name or face attached to what they're contributing. So having that thick skin, being prepared to deal with that is really key. But also engaging with the public and providing online educational content requires constant stewardship and dedication to our missions that serve the interest of the public. The people who are on Ask Historians, the people who have been moderating for years and years and years, like myself, we do it because we see the value in being able to create grassroots discussion about history that is inaccessible normally to the general public. Um, and getting people involved in that. And I'll give you a really, really direct example. Um, Myself is really how I got started in higher education and academia was through Ask Historians. By the time that I started answering questions on Ask Historians, just as a random old person in my living room, at my computer, I was working as a carpenter's apprentice, a union carpenter's apprentice, doing jobs throughout the I-5 corridor. And it was actually on Reddit that I had heard of a place called Northwest Indian College on one of the Native American subreddits, and I never knew that there was a college for Indians. So I went. That's when I went back to. I left the trades and I went back to college was because of Reddit, and how I kind of got my foot in the door of going to my first conferences was that I got appointed to be a moderator of Ask Historians, and they wanted me to come and share my experience, and that's how I started presenting at these things. So having this commitment is really important because you really can generate the engagement, the interest that you want to see, and create opportunities for people that might not otherwise have them, and that might not be there for them. And then moderating online comments requires discernment in how you deal with contentious or problematic comments. This is a very key one, and this one's kind of woven into my other two areas about tips. You need to ask these questions. What comments are genuine inquiries? What comments are needlessly provocative? what comments are problematic? And with that, right, you need to ask yourself, is addressing the problematic content useful? Sometimes we just kind of need to leave it there. We just spin our wheels, and that's where we're kind of constrained by, like I said, our roles as public officials. That sometimes maybe it verges on a line of inappropriate, or what we might think is inappropriate or disrespectful. But right, the courts have also found that sometimes content, just because it's what you might think is inappropriate, doesn't mean that it can be removed from a public platform on work that's being done by public officials. So that's when if you are going to choose to address it, you need to ask these kinds of questions. Is it useful to address it? Does addressing problematic content contribute to a constructive dialogue? And also, what signs are there that the content is problematic? Being able to discern problematic content in the online space when it's like misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, bigotry, that's really important to be able to do, because knowing the degree to how offensive it is does give you some latitude in how to respond to it. I'll give you some examples here. Um, on anti-Semitism, because this is a big one that we deal with on Ask Historians. I'll just tell you right now, we have a blanket rule, of course, of no anti-Semitism, and we specifically Holocaust denial. Holocaust revisionism, Holocaust denial is very huge in online spaces, unfortunately. And there's also other bigotries that we outright ban. Genocide denial in general is something that we don't tolerate on Ask Historians. There are a couple caveats that we have for educational purposes, but for the most part, anybody engaging in Holocaust denial, we just ban them right away. And that has to do with another tip I'll relate here soon. But I'll give you some examples of posts that we deal with about needing to use discernment in the content. Content warning as well. These are anti-Semitic posts. This first one is very straightforward about Holocaust propaganda, and the user in this case is just outright saying that the Holocaust is fake, that nothing happened, that you can ask these lines of quote unquote logical questions to arrive at the conclusion that the Holocaust isn't real. And of course, this was removed. People on the subreddit didn't see it. It's usually caught very quickly. If it's not caught by one of our filters, it's caught by one of the moderators very quickly. And the user was promptly banned, right? And this was, you can see here, 17 minutes on the timestamp. So within 17 minutes, this post was dealt with. But here's another example, right? This is very blatant. This is very obvious. You can deal with this immediately, right? And I think even as public officials, like if we saw Holocaust denialism, we could deal with that very effectively and quickly. Here's a post that is a little bit different. It's still, I would say probably most of us would still like say, yeah, that's not good, right? This is a question someone asked: how were Nazis able to cremate the death camp victims on such a large scale? And in this case, right, the question, it's not outright denying that the Holocaust happened, right? It looks almost like maybe a legitimate, I hate to frame it this way, logistics question about the Holocaust, right? Which is how a lot of Nazis try to portray this, right? They try to portray it with, what seem like logical questions. We call it JAQ. They're just asking questions. And in this case, they're bringing up reference to a very common, though, if you're familiar with this area, very common tactic that's used by Holocaust denialists or revisionists that question the amount of people that were murdered in the Holocaust. How could it have actually been done? It's meant to plant that seed of doubt in someone's mind and subvert their critical thinking on it by trying to employ kind of like a superficial critical thinking to it. And then this next one is very very covert, and it's evasive. Like, again, this is where the discernment really comes in. So this is a question that might look very, oh, actually, sorry, this last one, the second one I'll give it. There's also other tells you should, if you're looking at taking action against someone on your social media platforms, there are many tells, not just in the question they ask or what they write. In this case, you can see we left the username in here because this is a point of interest in discerning. Dab on Jannies on Reddit the social media platform. Jannies, janitors, is an insult used for moderators because people call us janitors cleaning up after the public. So having some insight right into nomenclature and trends and memes and all that kind of stuff that happen on these social media platforms can be very useful in identifying the problematic content that is actionable that you can do something about, right? And that's a kind of a point of reference that we can use to say, okay, this user is definitely not acting in good faith, right? So this third one is again much more covert, and this actually was approved, if I remember right, initially on our subreddit by a moderator who does not have a background in World War II, or in Wehrmacht war crimes, or genocide studies, or that period of time at all, because it might look like a legitimate question. Is asking about the commander of Auschwitz, and who there's a record of some of their recorded thoughts talking about the uh, guards at Auschwitz who were gassing, putting gas into the chambers, right? And the idea behind this question that it's used usually by Holocaust denialists is that it is trying to humanize the guards at Auschwitz, and other death camps, other concentration camps, in a way that kind of creates a disassociation with what they consider to be the mainstream narrative that we're taught about the Holocaust. That, of course, this was done by evil people, people who believed that this was a good thing, etc. But it looks very legitimate, right? It's not outright questioning it. In some respects, right? We talk about humanizing people in historical narratives, so it's taking an approach that even historians, right, might see some kind of angle to doing in their own research. And yet, through triangulation and reviewing these, you can arrive also at that this was definitely more of a subtle attempt to introduce Holocaust denialism into our mainstream platform. So again, right, commitment to our mission is really key in this, and being discerning in how we are enforcing, this mission on these platforms. So takeaway number two then is kind of related to that. It's holding true to your values. Holding true to your values is really important too. And part of that is you must accept, like we do on Ask Historians, that you are a gatekeeper or a content cop. You are, and you engage in censorship. Whether we call that moderation, curation, stewardship, just being very honest about it, right? That is what you're doing. Is you are curating, moderating a space in order to have a particular outcome, right? Which, of course, for us, many of us, it's education. And in order to have an educational environment, right, that's conducive for learning, you can't have it filled with misinformation, disinformation, bigotry, attacks against other people, right? And that necessitates that, at least to some degree, some content has to have action taken upon it, whether that's removing it, whether that is issuing some sort of punitive measure, blocking an individual, whatever that might be. And you can't hesitate to intervene with dealing with problematic material, offensive comments, or mis or disinformation. If you're going to provide public content, online content, you have to be willing to be that steward of it as well. You can't just shake your hands once it's posted and walk away and say, the public can sort it out for themselves. Because in my opinion, that is abdicating our duty. We wouldn't want someone coming into one of our museums or our archives or our collections or one of our exhibits or displays, and putting graffiti all over the cases or pushing over the signs or disrupting the experience for guests. So in a very similar way to how we curate our physical spaces, we need to curate our digital spaces as well, and treat them the same like that. And of course, we have to carry this out ethically, responsibly, and fairly in accordance with the expectations that are placed upon us as public employees. And so this kind of goes back to what I was saying. Your guidelines for online discourse are really key to this because you should make a specific reference to the language that justifies your actions. You should always have a justification for your actions that you can point back to say, this is why I did this. And if you can't take what some might consider to be a punitive action, at least some sort of guide for yourself on how you will try to address that in the confines that we have upon us as being public officials. And part of that is making sure that your audience clearly understands what is expected of them when engaging in online discourse. And so, for example, I've got some excerpts here. When we have a bunch of template boilerplate responses we provide to the public for a myriad of situations, I'll talk about that too a second here. This is an example of what we call the 4 questions. These are kind of the 4 guiding questions we give to users who submit answers to questions that are not quite up to the standard that we're looking for, but we want to work with them. We want to educate them, right? And this is our way of saying your answer didn't quite meet the standard, but it could. And with some coaching, here's how you could do it, right? And here's some things that you want to consider. Do you have the expertise needed to answer this question? Have you done the research on this question? Can you cite academic quality primary and secondary sources? Can you answer follow-up questions? Right? Having these kinds of educational responses allows us to influence the space and set the tone for how people should engage. And that does, in a way, right, act as a form of moderation on the space without having to result in punitive action. And then, of course, like I said, having robust rules is part of this as well. We have this kind of small preamble that talks about what the purpose of our subreddit is, and our number one rule is civility. Always civility. How do we engage with each other? That we won't tolerate racism, sexism, other forms of bigotry. We also just explicitly name Holocaust denialism. Personal insults, nitpicking around grammar, spelling because it's the internet, right? Those kinds of things. But civility is our number one rule, and it's kind of our guiding principle to the rest of our rules, what they're built upon. So tips for responding for number 2, right? For those takeaways, like planning and training. These are key things in my opinion. You need to ensure that any plan or strategy for digital engagement, whether that's a survey, a digital project, public comments, are raised for moderation and curation to are raised to that level of importance. It's not an afterthought. You have to consider this as well if you're going to post something online. You have to clearly articulate the organizational structure of those who handle online content moderation internally, whether it's whether it's one person, your social media person handling something, it's several people, maybe a digital project, or if it's an office, if you are lucky enough to have an office dedicated to digital content curation, which maybe many of us don't, whatever it might be, right? But you have to have very clear organizational structure because it provides a chain of command to make decisions and apply policies, and it can be helpful to clarify this for the public. But really, it's important for yourself. It's to clarify it for yourself and your organization. You need to find ways to display your expectations for conduct so the public can be aware, whether that's maybe something on your website that might link to your social media saying this is kind of our expectation for conduct, user conduct. If you're at the point maybe where you have your own platform and you have terms of service, whatever it might be, you need to the public needs to be adequately informed or reasonably so that you have an expectation that they're informed. We know not everybody's going to read our rules on Ask Historians, but we post them everywhere. They're on the front page. We talk about them all the time. So, it's a buyer beware at that point if you don't read the rules. You need to train your content moderators to spot mis or disinformation or problematic materials, like we were just talking about. Train them to assess the situation, looking at the profile of a user, finding common tells for bad actors, as I mentioned. You need to commit to action and establish a clear rationale for the actions that you take, and assessing the values of your organization, team, or the person doing this moderation work, and conducting norming exercises to ensure you're not acting on your own bias. And I think maybe that's where a lot of some of our concerns come from, right? Is that, okay, I might find this content to be offensive, or I don't find this content offensive, but the person next to me, someone else in my organization, might find it offensive or not offensive. How do you square that with each other then, right? Well, it's ensuring that everybody in your team and your organization is on the same page, that you have those same values. That's what works for Ask Historians, is that we have this vetting process for appointing moderators that we ensure they have the same values that we do as well. And then some might say, well, is that an echo chamber? Is that confirmation bias? And yeah, at that point, I just say, you know what? It doesn't matter because we still have the most subscribers. So, but that is a question to definitely talk about. But as far as your concerns might come from bias within your own organization, conducting norming exercise is important to see how would you versus a colleague of yours respond to this same situation. Where can you find the common ground to ensure that you meet both ends in dealing with this kind of content?
Hey, Kyle, just
Yes.
really quickly, we have 10 minutes left and some great questions in the chat. So
Gotcha.
I don't
Okay.
want to rush you, but just ahead.
No worries. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, and I've already echoed this. Takeaway three is that rules are key. You've got to have some kind of codified rules or guidelines for your users. These rules must be enforced consistently. You should have internal rules or code of conduct for your moderators to ensure compliance. And it's important to know when to disengage. That's honestly the biggest takeaway I can give you here is you need to know when to just not talk to them. You don't get into a power struggle with users or with students, as my one of my mentors always tells me, don't get into a power struggle with students. Don't get into a power struggle with users, especially if you hold the power, don't give it to them. um, and so some tips for this, having robust public facing rules and policies provide clear guidance on how to proceed with a troublesome person or problematic content, right? And that's making sure that you thoroughly think through rules or guidelines that you have firm follow through in enforcing them, that you craft rules that meet the needs of your content and the platform you're using. Clearly articulating that organizational structure again, just as a reminder in there that you want to have that. Put that in there twice because it's really important actually. And then the last thing, and this is like the biggest tips I can offer you here, internal rules conduct for moderators. What does that look like? Maintaining civility and professionalism with the public, of course, is key to this. Treating misinformed users gently at first, and if they escalate, you let them escalate and you respond accordingly. Don't you have to hold that level of professionalism, especially as a public official. And so just make it clear that you're performing your duties, that you're enforcing these guidelines if you have them, or that you have a rationale for why you took some sort of action. And if they escalate, let them do it. You never should be the one to escalate. Respond to the inquiries about removed comments or sanctions with transparency, but only tell them what they need to know because then they'll try to rules lawyer you on that. And that gets really annoying, especially if you're the one who wrote the rules and you're like, what are you trying to do here? And lastly, ask historians. We have this thing that we call the bit parity rule. Bit parity is the username of one of our moderators, but he established this very quintessential guideline again about how much we engage with users, a maximum of 2 responses to a hostile user unless there is clear indication that they understand what is being conveyed and they might improve in their conduct. And that's for your own mental health and for the health of your community. Really set a limit for how the amount that you will engage or respond to problematic users or content. I forgot I had this other one. Okay, last thing, actually, preset responses. We have preset responses. We call them boilerplates or macros for everything. I mean, tons of it. And this is also really key. So you don't have to write the same message over and over again to the same Holocaust denier, or whatever it might be. We have preset responses for removed comments, whether it's soapboxing, anecdotes, joke responses, up to bigger things like racism, bigotry. If they have a long comment with good content, but it's wrong information or terrible sources, we have a preset comment to give to them. We have preset responses for dealing with users who contact us with inquiries. Did you read the ban message? Prove you didn't use AI to write this answer. Why are your comments not appearing? Things that we issue daily, really. Preset responses for approved posts with critical issues about like, why didn't I learn this thing? Well, there's a reason you didn't learn this thing because the U.S. education system is not consistent across all the 50 states. And lastly, too, for problematic content, we have very lengthy preset responses that we issue to users. If they ask a question about the prevalence of anti-Semitism, it's not Holocaust denialism, but like, why do Jewish people always seem to get hate? We have a preset response of 10,000 characters to answer that. Or if they're asking about questions around American Indian genocide denial, genocides that occurred here through colonization of the Americas, we have a preset with links, information to explain that as well. And ultimately, the best advice I can give you is try not to platform hate speech or those who are, again, just asking questions, because their sole goal is not to get their content, is to get their content in front of others. They could not care less about you. It is not about you at all. It is not about you. It's not about your organization. It's about getting in front of people who don't know better. So keep that in mind when you moderate your social media.
Awesome, Kyle. Whew. Okay. That was great. And yes, if you would send me your slide deck, because I'm sure folks will want to take a look at it.
I will do so.
Yeah, cool. So I'm going to share a couple of the questions. So yes, Emily appreciated the bit parity rule her question earlier was sort of, and if you could put your head more in a Facebook space for this, because I think you
Hmm.
would probably treat it differently than on Reddit. But you know, you've posted something, a comments thread has emerged that has gotten messy and contentious and provocative. Do you have any, or can you imagine, or is it useful to have a hard and fast rule on when to shut that thread down, or do you kind of let the users correct and engage? What's your thought?
Yeah, so I mean, my initial reaction is that depends on the health of your community. Do you have people who are going to do that, like regulars to your Facebook page? You know, I have Facebook pages, I'm a regular too, and I see the same people there, right? And I can trust, you know, if I feel like they're going to respond to something else. But if you don't have a robust community to do that, a hard and fast rule is advisable. Because again, the people who need to be shut down, they're not trying to talk to you, they're not trying to change your organization, they're not trying to get an exhibit put up, you know, in a public space. They want to get these fringe ideas in front of people who don't know better, and a hard and fast rule is critical to shutting down. And sometimes that seems antithetical to our roles as educators, and it, you know, I can understand that. It was for me at first too when I started moderating. But they're a dime a dozen. They're everywhere. I hate to say it, but in online spaces they are. And a hard and fast rule not only protects yourself and your sanity, it protects the public as well. Um, Public discourse, you know, where we have these really critical discussions and debates, those are meant for different forms. I'm sorry, but you cannot have an effective debate over Facebook comments, half the time, even over Reddit comments. And so a hard and fast rule is, I would say, is critical in that case.
And maybe we can, if you can think of one, and then you can just email me later, and I can share it out to everybody of like an example of what a rule, because obviously you want to make sure that rule is pinned to the top of your page, is in your, you know, about section of Facebook. You know, if it's something like, um, you know, you get up to two chances to comment on something or whatever. Anyway, maybe you can help me brainstorm that, an example of what a role like that would look like. Okay,
Yeah.
folks, if you need to log off, no problem. We're going to keep recording and to answer these last few questions and see if there's any other questions from the group. And I will email the recording link to everybody. So if you have to jump off, no worries. You can still watch sort of the last few minutes of this. So here are some specific Reddit questions. This was a question I had as well. You mentioned the bot moderators, and Wendy was just curious to know, like, as people are more and more inclined and have easier access to AI, where they can generally find answers to questions, maybe not always the best answers to questions, do you think that's going to impact you know, how the number of users you get to ask historians, or like,
Hmm.
yeah, how does that play into this?
Yeah, with the advent of a lot of these consumer level AIs, we've had an impact to it. Interestingly enough, I don't think it's affected our question rate too much, because people, especially our existing user base, come to ask historians because they know what they're going to get. And if you're a Reddit user in general, they know what they're going to get at Ask Historians because of our reputation. So they come there anyways. And our large digital footprint, I think, is what's sustained our audience. Mostly, we see the use of AI in trying to write answers to answer questions, and they're very, you know, also like with student work, very easily identifiable, and we ding them very quickly. We also understand that AI is many consider it to be a tool for accessibility, especially like if English is your second language, or you know, third or greater language, right? You know, it's because of that, we have structured it to where if a person can find a justifiable reason and prove it, they can prove it to us that that's what they used it for. We can allow AI generated content, or modified content, I should say, but we typically do not allow it as an outright answer to our questions. And I don't believe statistically, and as far as our traffic, we've seen a huge impact actually because of that. Mostly, I think because of our 10+ years of cultivating the kind of environment that we have for asking questions.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And then just one last request. Would you be willing to just share by email with me your kind of boilerplate language about Holocaust denialism and American Indian genocide? I think folks are curious to see that. I'm sure
Yep.
they could. wouldn't have trouble finding it on the Reddit page. But if you could send that over to me, that'd be great.
I will certainly do so.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Any other, maybe we'll take just one or two questions before we have to sign off, or anything anybody that's on the Zoom would like to share, just unmute yourself. If there's anything else, or we can say goodbye, and I'll follow up with some of these links and slides.
For manipulation by secret government entities.
Oh, yeah.
Not that, well, we've had a lot of unethical research involvement from researchers from like universities who don't disclose that they're doing it. We've had a lot of run-ins like that. But I come from a people who experienced COINTELPRO, so like I think the government's involved in everything. Maybe they are, but nothing overt that I have seen on Ask Historians.
Right, but you've got a helpful dose of skepticism.
Yes.
Sure, at all times. Yes. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you, Kyle. It's a really unique perspective that you offer, and kind of helpful to learn from you some of the ways that you can kind of set yourself up to be successful in doing this hard work of moderating these kind of anonymous spaces, right? I really, really appreciated that. And I appreciated your general message of like commitment to mission and values is really how we should be doing all of our work, right? And this digital space is no different. So, okay, thanks, Kyle. Everybody, thank you for being here. We hope to see you at one of our future programs, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank y'all.